Welcome to the Allo.Capital podcast. If you're just joining us, we are summoning Allo.Capital, a new spin-out from Gitcoin that is designed to build the capital allocation layer of the tokenized internet. We think there's big upside here. Capital allocation is a multi-trillion-dollar design space where everyday people, VCs, governments, NGOs, and DAOs all have to allocate capital. But it's also a place where we can start small. Every time you spend money, you are allocating capital. We think that the space of capital allocation is going to be completely rewritten by the tokenized internet. With blockchains, we can now program our values into our money, and we can build economies that represent our values better than ever before. We're threading a through line, partnering with builders, researchers, and funders to figure out what on-chain capital allocation looks like and building it, dogfooding it, and using it on-chain. If you want to learn more, visit our website at Allo.Capital, where you can download the Allo books for free, play with some of our dApps, join the Telegram, or participate in the DAO. All right, today's episode, we are continuing our study of Gitcoin grants going multi-mechanism, and this time studying retrofunding with Carl Cervone from Open Source Observer and Ed Flemming from Gitcoin. So what we're taking a look at here is within the broad swath of Gitcoin going multi-mechanism. We did an experiment, and we being the royal we around Gitcoin. The Gitcoin DAO actually did most of this experiment. I'm just covering it as a podcast host. Did an experiment in retrofunding. So retrofunding is a mechanism that has been invented and pioneered by Vitalik and in the Optimism ecosystem, and it has evolved quite boldly, I might say, around the design space of retroactively rewarding builders for their impact. And GG23 featured an experiment in rewarding Ethereum builders retroactively for the impact that they have had using what's called impact metrics-based retrofunding, which is basically a system in which badge holders, instead of selecting projects, select which impact metrics they think are the most impactful. So things like unique users, block space consumed, number of new users brought into Ethereum. So basically you reward the metrics, and then the metrics are translated into which projects are the ones that actually had the most impact on that metric. And so something that was pioneered in the Optimism ecosystem, Gitcoin's now applying it to the Ethereum ecosystem. And this mechanism is available to you if you want to accelerate growth in your ecosystem. So Gitcoin's going multi-mechanism. In this episode, we took a spotlight and take a look at the retrofunding experiments that were done in GG23. The next voices that you hear will be Matilda, the Gitcoin program lead, Carl Cervone, the open source Observer founder and the provider of all the metrics, Ed Flemming, VP engineering at Gitcoin, and the person who built the retrofunding experiment for Gitcoin. And we're going to cut over to the Twitter Space recording of this about this now. So I hope you enjoy.
Okay, so what are we going to be discussing today? We're going to be discussing a little bit about the retro voting that is going on right now in GG23. So if you have been paying attention, GG is now a multi-mechanism. So GG23 has been our first experiment of our multi-mechanism future with the program. What that means is that we have shifted towards looking at our builder life cycle almost and seeing which mechanisms make most sense to fund our builders at a specific stage in their growth. QF is really powerful for early stage builders, and we are experimenting with a retro funding round for our more mature builders. So we have bucketed our mature builders into a round that is 30 of our top builders since GG18. And yeah, the whole interface and the whole experience has changed. So of course we're used to donating in QF, but with the retro round, it's all about voting. So that's what we're going to be discussing today, what that looks like, what it means, why we chose the metrics we did, and yeah, then we'll go from there. But if you don't know who I am at this point, my name is Matilda. I'm Grant's program lead at Gitcoin. Yeah, and I want to welcome Carl, Day, and Ed to the stage. Carl, I'll hand it over to you first for a quick intro, and then we can get going.
Hey, Matilda and everyone, great to be here. Excited that we survived the first retro round. There was a lot of interesting experiments that are happening here, both the mechanics of how to select the projects, to how to come up with good metrics for badge holders to vote on, to actually modeling, is this going to be better for them than participating in a standard quadratic funding round? All interesting questions. I'm excited to dig into the data once the round closes and see what happens. But it was really fun testing this out, and I always appreciate Gitcoin's willingness to experiment and put real money on the line in doing so. Maybe over to you, Ed.
Cool. Thanks, Carl. Hey, everyone. My name is Ed. I'm leading product engineering at Grants Lab. And yeah, really excited with how this round came out. I'm a huge fan of metrics-based retrofunding, and it is super cool to see it live in action.
Amazing. Day, over to you.
Awesome. Thank you. I'm Day. I'm the grants program coordinator at Gitcoin, and I'm super excited to have this discussion and kind of dive deeper into what the retro round voting is, how the retro round came about, and just kind of discuss everything with you guys.
Amazing. So why don't we dig into it? Call you, me, and Ed. We've been very close to designing this for quite a while. So would love to hand it over to you, Cole, kind of around the metrics and where Open Source Observer has really stepped in to support us and be a huge partner in designing this. I know that there was hesitation around going metrics based for this round specifically. And yes, I agree. We've already had a lot of feedback. We've already had quite a lot of discussion around the metrics specifically, and just how a round like this is designed. So would love, because we're talking about the voter experience here, would love to know from your perspective and Ed around the metrics that were chosen and how that all came about.
Great. Before getting into the metrics specifically, it might be helpful just to share a bit more of the backstory about what we were trying to address with the round. And I think if you look at the criticism that quadratic funding often gets from builders, they will say typically two things. So one of them is that it often turns into a popularity contest. If you are a newer project that doesn't yet have a large community, it can be very difficult to get noticed and to kind of compete head to head with some of the more established projects that have been doing Gitcoin rounds for many years. So that was one thing. And then a second thing that you also hear from builders, even the mature ones, is that it is also a lot of marketing work to kind of mobilize your community, get them to show up and vote and participate each time. And so the kernel of the idea was, okay, well, what if you actually say, if you are a builder who has been around for a certain amount of time, you have definitely proven yourself worthy of being kind of at the top of the list in quadratic funding rounds, year in, year out, then maybe there is a new level that you can graduate to. And that could put you in a not only different mechanism, but also with a different tier of projects that you're with. And that would have two benefits. So number one, it would allow those projects to be, kind of have a bit of peace of mind that they're going to have a more stable amount of funding that comes around. And second, it would give some of the newer projects a chance to really shine and attract more attention. So I think that if you kind of look at the way that we selected the projects, there was a couple things that went into the first determination. So as we mentioned earlier, Matilda, how many rounds have you been participating in Gitcoin for? We've been around for quite some time. Number two, have you been consistent in terms of mobilizing your donor community to show up, and in terms of building your product or whatever it is that you're doing? There's some things that you can kind of track longitudinally to see, okay, here's a product that's not just here for one round, but they've been around for several years. And so that was the basic foundation, just a way of identifying products that have been around for a while and had consistently had a good showing on Gitcoin. And then the next step was to say, okay, so we can identify these mature builders, but what is the way of kind of comparing all of them together? Because you have a lot of different projects that meet these requirements. You have some that are developing Ethereum libraries. You have others that are building decentralized applications. You have some which are doing co-living. You have others which are doing social networks. It's very difficult to compare these different types of projects. And so for a while, we were actually kind of nervous about this because projects never like being compared side by side. And when you try and collapse things into just a few metrics, then people typically feel that the metrics don't present them in the most favorable way. So this led us to thinking, okay, well, maybe there's a better way of framing this, which is what is the impact that this product has had on the Gitcoin community itself? How many donors have they brought up? Have they been able to encourage those donors not only support their project, but actually support other products in the ecosystem? Since its beginning, Gitcoin has cared a lot about supporting open source developers. Have they been able to attract and retain a variety of open source developers to their product over time? So these are all different things that we thought might be interesting. And the goal, of course, through metrics-based voting was to get the badge holders or experts to decide, here are a range of different things, and here are the ones that we think are the most important for Gitcoin and for signaling what Gitcoin is all about. So that was the kind of idea. And then the way we went about implementing it is we looked back on the past couple of years, all the projects, identified the ones that had consistently performed quite well, regardless of what rounds they were in, brought them into a group of 30 or so, and then applied a set of 8 or so metrics that we kind of tested out together. And there was a Go post explaining the metrics, explaining the product had been selected, and then, things kicked off. So I think that's like the full story and end of how we went from idea to rolling it out in the past couple of months.
Yeah, thank you for that, Carl. It's been, it's always so exciting to try new things and to design this. It's been definitely a huge learning curve. And as you mentioned briefly as well, it's like one of my favorite parts of what I do is the retrospectives. After every round, we get feedback and we dig into the data and we see how we can improve and evolve even more in a future round. So I'm really excited about that next piece as well. Ed, I would love to hear from you as well. Next up, from your perspective, because you've also been really deep in designing this as well as, creating this brand new platform.
This might be controversial, but if people are saying that quadratic funding is a popularity contest, first off, I don't think that's a bad thing, but that's another tangent. I would argue that traditional retrofunding is also a popularity contest. And that implies that to win, in quotes, the metric you're measuring is your social influence, your memeability. And so I really like the idea of being deliberate about the metrics that we're measuring. And everything is measurable. They're very quantitative metrics. And it lets us organize them around a goal. Like, what are the KPIs that we believe will help guide us towards this goal we have? And for GG23, that was a big part of that was like Gitcoin grants and the community and all of that. And so the metrics are aligned with that goal. It just feels very elegant to me to be like, here's what we want to accomplish. Here are the numbers that we want to see go up to help accomplish that. Let's incentivize people and reward people who have helped those numbers. And so, I'm loving how this came together. I do think that it's a challenge to get alignment around those goals. Like I mentioned, the focus of this round was on the success of GG and Gitcoin grants. And different rounds will have different goals and they'll have different metrics associated with those goals. That's kind of where my head's at.
One thing that I think is a little bit easier too when you're not actually like looking at the voting interface in the moment, and you can kind of step back and say, if I really think about, what matters to Gitcoin and to growing the community, and how can I express that through these metrics? I think it might lead you to take a different strategy than what many people did. So let me be more specific. There were 8 metrics that you could vote on. I think what most people probably did was say, I'm going to construct some kind of blend of each one. So I'm going to give like 10% to this one and 20% to that one and come up with some portfolio, right? Because you want to basically give some funding to every project, and you're going to kind of look at the results and say, all right, I think this product should be on the top. Therefore, I'm going to give more weight to this metric, which that product does well on. Now, the thing we're forgetting is actually the way this works is that there's going to be some aggregation that's going to be coming across all the other ballot holders that have voted. And so perhaps the better strategy is to not look at any of the projects and say, okay, what do I think is the most important signal to be sending to builders about what the value is of Gitcoin? And it could be that you really think Gitcoin is important for supporting like a small solo OSS developer who is going to be working kind of persistently on this project and turning down other opportunities because they're able to get enough grant funding to be a full-time quadratic freelancer. So there's definitely people that I think, back in the day would say that is what Gitcoin is for. That is what the type of product that Gitcoin should be funding. And if you had that kind of a mindset, then the metric that might be best for you, I think there was one which basically said, the number of, it was like a retention related metric, which just looked at the size of the team and how consistent that was over 18 months. And I think at the top of the list was ethers.js. So Rick Mu, who has basically been a solo developer maintaining this project. And Gitcoin grants has been like a very important source of funding for them over the years. But then you could also say, actually, I think the goal is very different. I want to support teams that are going to be growing and much larger and attract some kind of a diverse community. Or in other cases, you might actually want to, you might see Gitcoin as one of the best ways of onboarding new people into crypto. And so the most important thing for you is to attract new donors and have those donors show up round after round. And so if you cared about that, there was a way that you could just select one or two of those metrics and vote on those. Now, I don't think most people voted this way. I think, again, they kind of looked at the projects and they said, okay, what are the metrics that map best? Which product I think should be on top? And I think it's a bit of a missed opportunity to learn a bit more about, why they think, what is the value that these products bring to Gitcoin? Because I think there's a lot of different ways of viewing that that could lead to some unexpected results.
Yeah, Ed, go ahead.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Like my takeaway from that, from a product perspective, is almost that we should hide how the metrics influence the ranking of the projects, to kind of have that be completely removed. And like, in theory, people don't even have to know what projects are involved in the retrofunding round to be able to talk about what metrics they think are important to the goal. Yeah, that's a really interesting thought.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, I was actually, I think I brought this up at the start of the round as well, because that's something that I saw right out of the gate, that even some projects were, how they were communicating to their community was, well, these are the metrics that we're the strongest in, et cetera, et cetera. And that's kind of like, I'm not saying that's a bad thing, but I do think, I thought this as well, that I do think having that view on the side, like it can skew the way someone votes for sure. Especially if we're thinking about the kind of voting behavior that we are looking for. So I think that's super interesting. One of the things that we also didn't do a good enough job of for sure is actually communicating out what the goal of this round is. So being really specific, not to try and sway how anyone votes, but at least just giving voters context, like a lot more context, and not have that goal buried in the comms as much as it was. Just giving people context, like, hey, this is the goal of the round. The reason we're measuring it this way is because of X, Y, and Z. So yeah, a lot of learnings for sure. And it's even when I went in to vote, it is your eyes kind of drawn to how the projects, how their rankings change on the side for sure. So I agree with you, Ed. Even the leaderboard as well that we have, it's interesting. What could a future look like if you don't even know the projects that are participating in a round? And that's that community signal that I would also be really excited about. It's like after a round, we should be able to answer the question exactly what our community deems valuable. So yeah.
Yeah, that enables like my dream builder experience, where people just kind of create their profile and we can start aggregating metrics for them. And then meanwhile, round operators can hold votes on what the community thinks is the most important KPIs to measure. And like builders don't even have to apply. They don't have to do anything special. We're just able to like aggregate all of this data for them as it happens, as the grants come in. And so like I love this idea. Yeah, it's a very cool future.
Putting my finger on the other end of the scale, one of the things that we lost out on, I feel, that this round was that many of these big projects, they will bring their community who shows up, obviously gives a donation to the product that they know the best, but then they will also be viewing other projects in the catalog and adding them to their cart. I'm guessing that we probably lost some of those voters who would have showed up to support Revoke Cash or to support Ethers or others that are, showing up every round. And I'm curious if there's a way that we could maybe do both. So potentially one version of this could be, you've supported this project for 4 years. Here are other projects that are similar that you might want to check out and help them with a bit of that curation. One thing that over the years has always been difficult for going in and doing donations, and a lot of people like myself will do several rounds of it just because the cognitive load is so high, is that there's 400 projects that you might be exploring. You probably only know a few of them firsthand. Even if you know a lot of them, you probably don't know them very well. And that kind of curation is really, really valuable. Obviously, I'm curious to know what are the projects that Di and Matilda and Ed support. That signal for me. But also, I definitely want to identify the projects that maybe the algorithm thinks are the stars of the future that might be under the radar right now, and give them some love early on so they can start rising up a bit faster.
And that's something that I've been thinking about a lot as well, is that project discoverability. And that's something that we haven't solved for well yet. Yeah, I think when I was crunching some numbers, and it's also, like I keep saying this, but we can't really compare GG23 numbers directly with GG22 just because the two rounds are so different. But if we do take out the donations that came in GG22 from those top 30 builders, they brought in at around 100K in donations in GG22. So, if we kind of compare those numbers, then we weren't super far off in GG23, but one of the reasons around that as well is, of course, also just the awareness of the those top 30 builders that come in. And I love your idea, Carl, around that curation level, is how can we make that donor experience and that project discoverability even more, even easier, and it's a feedback that I already also saw again in GG23, that project discoverability is really difficult. And that's something that I think that if we start solving for, it's going to, especially if we're going multi-mechanism and we're thinking of different and new novel ways to fund builders, I think that's going to be a huge value add. Ed, are you back with us? Yeah, we've got about 7 minutes left. So if you are listening to this and you have not voted, or if you haven't checked if you're eligible, so how we're also doing, I'll quickly just go over this as well, but how we're doing this as a badge holder in GG23 is we decided to do 3 tiers of badge holders. So what this means is that each tier has a specific eligibility criteria and a specific weight to their votes. So we have experts, so expert badge holders. These are around 30 individuals that have been handpicked by Gitcoin. These are individuals that have really deep experience and expertise within the Gitcoin and the Ethereum ecosystem. And their votes are weighted the highest. So their votes will have the most influence on the outcomes. And then we also have 2 tiers of community badge holders. So the first tier is donors, which I'm excited about because it's like, if you have shown up consistently since GG18, I think it's like if you have donated in 5 or more rounds, at least $50 in each round, then you are eligible as a donor community badge holder. And then anyone holding 30K or more GTC. We decided to keep the pool smaller this time, but there's also a lot of lessons that we've learned in the eligibility as well. One of the things is that we've learned is that direct outreach is very much needed in getting people to engage in voting. But yeah, if you haven't checked if you are eligible, they did drop the link to the round page where it gives you an overview of what the round is, all the projects, as well as a link to go check if you're eligible. All you need to do is just connect your wallet that you have donated on. And then, yes, voting takes a few minutes, which is also really, it's also really great because I know that project-based can take quite a lot of time, to vote on. So yeah, I think there's been a lot of learnings. I'm very excited about how this is going to evolve in the future. And the results as well will be posted fairly soon. It'll be the same process that we follow for QF. So we'll be posting the results on the forum for QF and Retro, and it'll be open for discussion for a week before we handle payouts. Is there anything else that either of you want to add?
I guess one question I have is the governance implications for this type of round design. So one example of that might be that an indicator that, or a metric that people could vote on was community rounds. And I think there's been like 5 or 6 community rounds that have happened alongside the main GG rounds that were kind of in scope. And I think that there's been a significant amount of funding that Gitcoin has put towards that through its matching fund. I'm kind of curious if that were to show like really, really strong results, if the actual holders really liked that as a metric, or if they really didn't like it, if that might influence how Gitcoin thinks about allocating more or less funding into some of the community rounds in the future.
Yeah, so what you're asking is whether we'll take that signal to maybe push more funding to community rounds and less to OSS, if I'm understanding correctly? Or
I mean, I guess I'm not necessarily saying that community rounds and OSS are different, just in the sense that the project, like as a mechanism for deciding what to do with the matching fund, the community round is different than a normal kind of branded Gitcoin round. And if people think that's really valuable, then maybe more funding might go into that. And if they don't think it's valuable, then maybe, there's less of that you see.
yeah, this is something I love that you bring this up, because this is something that I'm thinking of a lot, is how do we get the community, how do we set up systems where we allow the community to signal even more and to build this with us even more. So this is something we're already thinking of for GG24, is how might we set up processes and, stronger governance methods where the community actually are the decision makers on how much funding we put towards the round, and also what we fund in every single round, getting more tactical with categories in the future. So yeah, definitely. I think that one of the things that I'm always really bullish on is taking that community feedback and having that be the foundation of where we move forward. So if we get a certain amount, certain feedback loops for this round, for sure, we'll definitely be using that to design the next round. Because one of the things as well, we've really been focusing on the OSS program this round because we went multi-mechanism with it. But one of the aspects that I want us to bring to the forefront again is the community round aspects as well. Like, where does that value add come in, and how can we set the 2 parts of the program up so that they're super aligned and that they kind of walk hand in hand, so to speak. So yes, the answer to your question, I think, is yes. Alrighty. Well, I know that you've got to hop in a minute, Carl, and I think that's pretty much all from my side. But thank you both for joining. And yeah, just a huge shout out to both of you for, all the work that you've done alongside us to design this round. And I'm really excited about digging into some of the data and the retrospective, and also just hearing from the community, their experience and what they thought, and how they think that we could maybe shift and evolve this in the future.
Lots of appreciation to the builders and the badge holders who participated in this round. As you said, really excited to hear their feedback.
Yeah. Amazing. Thank you both. I hope that, everyone has a good rest of your day. Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you. Bye.
Alrighty, you just heard from Carl Cervone, Matilda, and Ed Flemming about retrofunding on Gitcoin. Really excited about the experiments that were done there. Thanks for listening to the Allo.Capital podcast. Again, we are featuring the people who are building the capital allocation layer of the tokenized internet. Disclaimer, this podcast episode is for informative purposes only and is not financial advice. Do your own research. Do not make any financial decisions based off of these episodes. In addition, disclaimer, I own crypto assets like ETHDAI, USDC, GTC, and a handful of different NFTs. I think this episode was fun. Spotlight in seeing Gitcoin going multi-mechanism, going into retrofunding. So I hope that you enjoyed it. I certainly enjoyed hearing from Ed and Carl and Matilda. And I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.